This meeting is being recorded.
Hey everybody, my name is Jim Farmer. I'm an arts reporter based out of Atlanta. I'm also a member of the GALECA, the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics. World AIDS Day is December 1st, and I wanted to bring together some panelists to discuss films that have dealt with HIV and AIDS over the last 4 decades and sort of talk about some of the ones that are most significant and maybe some of the ones that have been overlooked a little bit. We have an amazing panel with us today. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves and we'll start talking about specific films. We'll start with Diane.
Sure, I'm president of GALECA, and I'm the former CEO and editorial director of Pride Media, where I most recently served as an editor, ed chief, or director of Out, The Advocate, plus Out Traveler magazines and Pride.com.
Great. Shaun?
I'm Shaun Stacy. I'm founder and editor-in-chief of girlculture.com, which highlights female and LGBTQ projects in the entertainment industry.
And Karl.
And I'm Karl Schmid. I'm an ABC news reporter and journalist. I'm also the executive producer and creative director of Plus Life Media, which is all about turning HIV stigma into something of the past and turning positive into a plus. And I cover a lot of entertainment news for ABC.
Great. I'm honored to be talking to you all. Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. So again, World AIDS Day, December 1st. There have been lots of films that have dealt with HIV and AIDS since the mid-'80s. Obviously, one of the first ones was An Early Frost. I think we're all familiar with the importance of An Early Frost, Aiden Quinn. But let's just sort of, let's just sort of talk about what you all think are some of the most vital films that have dealt with HIV/AIDS over the last 4 decades.
I think some of the early films are absolutely critical to, I think, understanding the culture in which this was coming out of, particularly for the LGBTQ community. So I think that for me, Parting Glances, Love, Valor, Compassion, Longtime Companion, Tongues Untied. I think those are all like critical musts. It's a different era, different issues, but at the heart, that shaped our generations. That shaped a couple of generations of our community in that way. And so there's sort of like must viewing to understand where we are now from where we were then.
Okay.
Also good films. I think that, you can find a flaw in all of them. Diversity is one. They're very white films other than Tongues Untied. But I think that there's something, critical in them.
As a child of the 90s, I pretty much go with Philadelphia as the first movie that sort of exposed the HIV crisis. Rent was also a big influence in my life, both the musical and the lesser known, probably not as good film. And A Normal Heart was really powerful for me whenever I was younger and made a huge impact on my life.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback a little bit off what Shaun said. As a child of the 90s, Philadelphia, and a child of the 90s in Australia and other parts of the world, not just the US, films like Philadelphia certainly were, really first exposure for young people of my generation of what HIV and AIDS looked like then. And I stress then because it looks very different, obviously, to how it looks now. Films, documentary series, things like How to Survive a Plague. Another one that was sort of quite personal to me was Holding the Man, a very powerful book that I read as a young man still trying to figure out his place in not just pronouns, but sexuality and everything else and where I fit. And that was a really important book to start with for me, as far as sort of finding characters that I could identify with. And so when the film came out, so beautifully brought to the screen, telling, a real, true love story, and what it means for forgetting gender, just to be in love, and to have to deal with this. And I think the great thing is that, you know, we celebrate these films that certainly talk about the past of what HIV was, and you know, show us a moment in time. But I also, you know, want to look to the future and hope, and I'm sure we'll get to that in this conversation, Jim, where we're talking about, you know, what we can look forward to, where it's not the Grim Reaper coming to snatch my child, my son away. Which, you know, again, important stories. But yeah, Holding the Man and
You know,
and Philadelphia. Yeah, so go, Diane.
I was just thinking of a couple others too that we should probably add there, in that Queen Latifah did Life Support, and that was, you know, it did not get the attention that something like Philadelphia does, but it really did, you know, get a bit of a Black woman's experience.
Well, same with Precious. If you look at Precious.
Yes.
Precious, it definitely had its supporters and detractors for sure. And then also, even though we know now there's some flaws in the original material, and the band Played On, I think is actually still relevant now, because part of what it did was, you know, people watched it because it had, you know, mainstream actors like Lily Tomlin and Matthew Modine and Richard Gere and stuff. But also, you know, part of that was about the scientific infighting that really delayed antiretrovirus, delayed treatment, delayed a lot of that stuff. And we saw a lot of very similar mechanizations during the early COVID days, right? So even though, you know, Schultz's editor kind of, you know, bungled a lot of stuff, and the whole patient zero stuff is BS, we know now. You know, through DNA, we know, but I think the source material and the fact that Randy himself was sick, and he had been reporting on this, you know, while he was dying, it added the sense of urgency to it, but it added the medical part that I think has not been fixed. You know, it's been fixed for HIV, but it has not been fixed in a grand scale. We still know, you know, PrEP can be controlled through, you know, politicization right now in some places, you know, being banned because of religious freedoms in some places. We know that HIV treatment can be, you know, refused through religious organizations and stuff. So I think some of those same pharmaceutical mechanizations that were in that movie, we can still see threads of now in our current scientific world.
And kind of perfect, Diane, since, you know, this World AIDS Day is all about inequalities, and inequity is the big sort of theme riding on this World AIDS Day. So really good examples to point out, I think.
I was a young gay man living in Athens, Georgia, going to the University of Georgia, still living there. And I came to Atlanta to see It's My Party. And it was the first time I'd been to Atlanta to see a movie with a big crowd of gay men. And boy, It's My Party just punched me in the stomach. And I watched that film again. It really holds up. I mean, what do
you make of, what do you think the experience is for those of us in the queer community, and those of us living with HIV, you know, like myself, that experience of being able to sit in a theater with our community about stories that are about us? And this sort of broadens it out a little bit, Jim, I think, not just on the HIV thing, but just talking about queer stories in general. You know, if you look at films that, you know, Fire Island, I just use it as a recent example because I was talking to the cast about it, but that we are now able to sit, and Bros too, we're able to sit and watch film, tragedy, comedy, drama, whatever, amongst our community and share those jokes without them sort of having to be explained, or situations having to be explained.
That's how I was going to say, that's how I felt at Longtime Companion, very similar to what your experience was. It was my first big movie that had gay subjects, that reflected all us. I had just lost my first, you know, friend who had died of AIDS complications. You know, is very young. We're just out, and you know, not very many years. And I just sat in that theater, and we were surrounded by other, mostly gay men, but also lesbians and obviously bisexual queer folks, and we were just sobbing. And I just was wrecked for days. You know, I would just think about the scenes and I would just start sobbing. And they were so prescient at the time because they were sort of like our experiences when we go to the hospital. You know, it's so different now because you know so much more about HIV. Back then, we had a period where the nurses wouldn't bring your food to you. Like they would give it to your friends, and your friends would take it into the room with you. You know, like that's how much, you know, ignorance there was about the virus and how much stigma and stuff. And so that for me really gutted me. And you compare it with something like Bros, which I also saw in the theater. And I was surrounded by, you know, straight people and LGBTQ folks. I'm not sure how much the straight people got of some of the jokes because they were so in group, but I did think, wow, this is so nicely in group. I bet it's going to bomb, you know?
But it is, but that's
wonderful.
the nice thing. We're not like, it's nice that we can go and experience theater and cinema where we're, you know, the joke, we're in on the joke. It's not, you know, like, you know, it's kind of nice to claim it a little bit as ours.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Philadelphia for a moment, because I mean, I watched Philadelphia again recently, and I had some problems with Philadelphia when it came out. I still have some problems with Philadelphia, but boy, it was an important film. I mean, there are things that that just hold up, especially the performances by Tom Hanks. But yeah, I mean, how important was Philadelphia in terms of reaching an audience and having mainstream people there to really drive home that film?
It was 100% critical. And it was, people now don't really realize at the time, what a risk Tom Hanks took there. Yes. In a role that many people had turned down before Tom. But he was advised not to take it as well. You know, nobody wanted, it wasn't just being gay in a film, which was already kind of like, don't do those roles, but also just being somebody living with HIV. But what it did, because he was such a, you know, mainstream film star and a rather beloved one already, after, you know, his TV series and stuff. And so that really allowed America to sort of like watch it in a way that it made it more acceptable and more presentable to mainstream Americans. And we did start to hear then more people who in some ways at least got, you know, that this was not like the wrath of God for us living with, you know, homosexual sin, that this is, you know, this is a disease that, you know, that can impact anybody, and that, you know, people were walking out of there believing Tom Hanks should have had his job, that his job shouldn't have been threatened. And that was really the first time. It
did what good cinema should do. It made us feel. It made us feel. And to your point, Diane, I think, you know, for so many people, and sadly, they still think this, oh, it's not something that I have to think about. HIV doesn't affect me because I don't have gay friends. It's not in my wheelhouse, but it was so mainstream. And because of the performances, and not just his performance, I mean, kudos to Denzel Washington too, as a black
Denzel,
you know, I mean, even in today, we look at where things stand with men of color in this country and HIV and how it's perceived in men who have sex with men. And just the character and his performance, it made us feel stuff, right? And they were faces we knew. And that's what good theater, I think, and good cinema does.
I was in high school whenever Philadelphia came out, and I grew up in rural South Carolina. So I remember how such a big moment that was to have local movie theaters that would actually show the movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple of films that are you know, that I think are quality films that aren't mentioned a lot. We mentioned Parting Glasses earlier. Parting Glasses came out the year in early frost. I think Parting Glass is a really good film. It doesn't deal with AIDS quite in the way others do overtly, but I think it's still a really good film with a character who's dealing with HIV and AIDS. The other,
and Steve Buscemi, you know, again, that's another one where this is because you know, Parting Glances, it was out before Longtime Companion, before so many. It was out before, you know, Tongues Untied even. And Steve Buscemi, you know, played this incredible character. And I remember people for many years, you know, would ask him in interviews, you know, if he had HIV or AIDS. I think they probably asked about AIDS. You know, it's a kind of thing where it's like, it was so moving that people projected that, you know, like onto him as an actor and stuff. But it's incredibly good film. It stands up still. definitely.
Exactly. As befitted the time, you know, a lot of films that came out, well, the majority of films that came out in the 80s and 90s, you know, had characters who did pass away. But then in 1995, we had the film Jeffrey. What do y'all think about Jeffrey? I think Jeffrey.
I'm going to put my hand up and say I haven't seen it. So
you haven't seen Jeffrey?
Bad me. So I'm not going to comment because I don't know it.
I'm also with Kyle. No, it's yeah.
That's
Diane,
so funny, huh?
how important was Jeffrey?
I think Jeffrey was a critical film at the time. I think it was under-celebrated. However, I think it was it was at the crux of a turning point films, you know, where things were changing. It was after antiretrovirals had come out, and that was a game changer. Like, it was literally like a switch, like, oh, we're no longer dying. Now what do we do? You know, like, and so you saw some of that sort of reflected in Jeffrey. What were your thoughts on the film, Jim?
I liked it. I mean, I haven't seen it in a long time, but I remember liking it. And it did feel like it stood out because it wasn't tonally like the other films. It wasn't dark and depressing, but it dealt with issues. But it had a sense of humor, which I appreciated, and I think was kind of neat. I thought we were at a point where we could, you know, 10 years later, really be able to maybe relax a little bit when dealing with subjects like this.
Yeah,
I just Googled Jeffrey while you were talking.
And watch it tonight.
I mean, you should watch it because, again, it's not just dealing with, you know, one of the things that I like about Jeffrey is it's dealing with something that a generation of, let's say, young Gen X or, you know, young Gen X people were growing up with, particularly queer men, in terms of, okay, well, maybe the only answer is to not have sex. I can still be gay, but not have sex. Yeah. We heard a lot of like sort of people, young men coming out around that time who were saying, you know, that was their only answer. We saw people who were long-term survivors saying that was the only answer. You know, it's the only way to be safe. Let's not have sex. And so Jeffrey confronted that in the form of a young man in New York City who's trying to, you know, remain celibate. And we know that, you know, that's very, very difficult, not just for gay men, but for many of us.
Anywhere.
Yeah. Anywhere. And so, but you do see that was confronting a stereotype, or not a stereotype, it was confronting sort of a like internal myth making we had in our community in particular. You know, for those of us who were, you know, those of us who were like ACT UP, we were part of ACT UP and Queer Nation, we were confrontational. At the same time, you had other people who were, you know, kind of recessive because, you know, their form of activism was to stay healthy and safe. But it was tied with survivor's guilt. It was tied with fear of sexuality and, you know, all of that. So that's where I think Jeffrey is important.
Jim, what's the panel's take on films? Like if you look at 1995's Kids, and just it popped up while I was Googling Jeffrey there, but you know, these storylines and in particular that film, which was, you know, about a young teenage girl who wants to save other young women from the boy who gave her HIV. What is the thought on the long-lasting stigmatizing effects of these films that, you know, in their narrative were, you know, perhaps trying to tell a story of the time, but unfortunately, here we are all these years later, where people are still buying into that. And these, what are your thoughts on the long-term effect of some of these very outdated ideas?
Well, the thing is with Kids, it was not like beloved by everybody. It was hotly debated. Jim could probably tell you more about that. I was not a fan of the film. I love Chloe Sevigny, but I hated Kids completely. I do think that, you know, it exposed, you know, a tiny portion of things, but I didn't even think that it was irreverent enough to, like, The Living End, I thought was much more irreverent and confrontational with youth. But Kids, I thought was a failure in that way. And it has, you know, that kind of stigma as long tentacles, definitely.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
I saw Kids when it came out. I did not like it. And I've completely forgotten about it until I was doing my list. I'm like, oh, Kids, yes. And I kind of like that. I don't think it was a very good film. And I think that it had had its themes.
Yeah.
I don't think it did it very well. It's not really remembered very fondly.
And it did it was in the art house circuit more than anything. I mean, not that Parting Glances wasn't as well. I mean, you know, some of these films they stayed in what we called the art house circuit back then, which is really like A films and foreign films. So but yeah, kids, it didn't break to the mainstream, and it wasn't I just didn't like it either. Yeah.
Let's talk about a film that no one ever talks about anymore. Boys on the Side with Whoopi Goldberg, Drew Barrymore, and Mary Louise Parker. And I don't know, I always loved that film, but I'd love to get your various takes on Boys on the Side.
Well, anything that you know, again, I mean, I'm looking at cheat sheet now from 1995 on my other monitor, but of that period, it was really stories about gay men, and here was a story about a woman. And I think that in itself is just a healthy perspective to change that narrative from us thinking that it was a white gay man's disease.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it played an important role in that capacity.
Why does no one talk about that film anymore?
Right. I think it did a lot for, as far as like the isolation that even somebody, you know, a straight white woman with HIV, the sort of isolation that they go to and the sort of challenges that they have that in some ways is not very different than everybody else. And you've got Whoopi Goldberg and Drew Barrymore's characters who just love her for who she is and want to be there to support her.
Yeah, I think that, you know, as somebody who identified as lesbian at the time, I felt like it was a little bit of a disappointment. You know, it was, Whoopi Goldberg was in love with Mary Louise Parker, who was dying, and Drew Barrymore was a bit of a flibbity-gibbet, along for the ride. There was a sort of level of criminality. And I think, you know, you have to remember also from our perspective at the time, it was like, why can't lesbians be happy? Why can't we have love? Like, you know, we were at the time, you know, feeling like we were the least likely people to actually get HIV at the time. And we were busy caring for our gay brothers in the community and stuff. But so, you know, you have to look at that film and where it placed in, I think, the history of sapphic cinema, you know, and know that there's that. And then, I think when men are looking at it, it's not a film for men. It's just like, it's a good film, but just like Fried Green Tomatoes, I'd be surprised if, you know, its majority of fans weren't women, you know? Yeah. So women's films, you know, that are largely about women that don't, you know, that where every scene passes the Bechdel test, those films, you know, I don't know, the audience often is just female, and then our, you know, fewer of us are critics, fewer of us get amplified, fewer of us, you know, get awards. And so I think they can not get, you know, it can be dismissed in that way. So
yeah, we've talked.
I think it's a good film though. I liked it.
Yeah. We talked about a lot of these films and their importance. And as we mentioned before, most of these films have come from, you know, a gay white man's lens. Parting Glances, to me, is a film that really holds up, but it's one of the only films I can think of that dealt with Black men and AIDS. I mean, can you think of any more? And if so, why not?
Well, Tongues Untied.
Yeah.
Was the first to deal with Black men and AIDS, and it still holds up. You know, I still recommend it to people to watch today. I think that you know, we had a little bit more on television. I think Hill Harper on Soul Food, that was sort of a groundbreaker, even though that was a serialized. You know, his character with Hill Harper and Rockman Dunbar is his brother, and he comes out, and they go through the traditional struggles that that we would expect like a Black family to go to around the coming out of one of them. So I think that was a groundbreaker. But in terms of cinema, I'm trying to remember what else.
I was again cheating here, but I was trying to think where the Best Picture winner Moonlight from a few years ago, from 2016, dealt with HIV themes, and I sort of scrolling through notes here and not seeing anything pop up. But
yeah, I don't recall it having an HIV/AIDS theme.
Right.
Tremendous film, you know.
But I would
and there
go
have been good documentaries, of course.
Yeah,
that's the perfect segue. Some of the most vital films that have dealt with HIV and AIDS have been the documentaries. How to Survive a Plague was an amazing documentary, but also, do y'all remember We Were Here from 2011?
Yep.
Anybody want to talk about those?
Well, I mean, I just think, you know, these are time capsules, and they're important time capsules. And while, you know, I personally am a big champion for looking to the future and changing the narrative on how we look at HIV, I think that these kind of documentaries are so important for future generations. Sure. As tools, as lessons, really, not, you know, to show us, much like to say how to survive a plague, you know, in very much the same way, in what not to do, in how not to treat people. You know, by having these kind of time capsules, we're really able to study and go, wow, you know, as humans, we have the capability to expel so much hate, but we also have the amazing capability to love. And so for me, as my dog starts barking, for me, documentaries, I think, are so important in the history and moving forward with the telling of HIV and AIDS.
Especially how important documentaries have sort of become in the past few years. Like, they're not just, it used to be documentaries were sort of looked at as like boring pieces of cinema, but it's, you know, it's how you learn about other people's lives now. Like, it's great that we have, you know, movies and TV shows that give us fictionalized versions, but the documentaries that give us the real life lowdown, basically.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of both documentaries. I mean, especially How to Survive a Plague, which is just it's just so comprehensive. It's an amazing document of some of the things that went on. I would ask you too about, obviously there was Philadelphia in 1993, which had Tom Hanks, Denzel Washington. In 2013, we had Dallas Buyers Club with Matthew McConaughey and Jared Leto, two, you know, very, very well-known actors, both of who won Oscars for this film. What were your thoughts on Dallas Buyers Club?
I personally, at the time, liked it. I understand the concern with Jared Leto playing a trans woman. Yeah. And I think, you know, I love Jared Leto personally, but I think that, you know, if that were cast today, that would 100% need to actually be a trans woman, or it would need to be a woman. Cisgender or transgender, a woman needed to play that role. So that's my main argument with Dallas Buyers Club, is that that's a distraction, you know, there. And I think so what it did was it perpetuated, you know, some of the stigma against trans women and some of the feeling that they're just a man in a dress. And so anytime we have a film that can like educate on one level, but then create stigma on the other, there's a failure in that. But I did think that we had a lot of, you know, we had a lot of friends who participated in the drug runs and stuff. And so there was certainly a lot of truth to that it felt very authentic in that. And, you know, I think there was certainly, it was, you know, it centered a particular white man's experience again, but I do think there was some value to some parts of it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it at the time, and I guess, you know, as time goes on, you start to Diane's point, go, well, you wouldn't do that now, and we're not talking about a film that came out too long ago. Yeah. But you also, you know, my concern again is the stereotypes that these films can you know, reinforce, and when it's a film that's, you know, I mean, hard to say, almost 10 years old, but it still feels like yesterday. There are people who, when they think of HIV, they'll go Dallas Buyers Club, Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And that's all that's their perception of HIV. And that to me is, you know, dangerous, quite frankly. I mean, and we go to the cinema for entertainment, but it's dangerous. And so, you know, just going back to what I said earlier, you know, I really hope, and I've said this in panel discussions with filmmakers and television producers, and we're seeing it now certainly on television, when you look at Pose and you look at other programming like that, where, you know, we're starting to look forward and break those stereotypes so that mainstream audiences are seeing what HIV and AIDS looks like in this day and age. And as long as people can remember that we're looking back at a period in time, that was an interpretation of that time, I think, great. But the problem is a lot of theater goers these days see it and go, oh, see, that's what it is. And I think the knock-on effect—
It validates.
Yeah,
it validates their prejudices and their
it's a shame because
preconceived
at the time, I loved the film and I was all over it as far as promoting it for ABC, and I was on every red carpet and I was championing the film and everybody in it. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and you kind of go, ouch now. And I don't know, watching it back now, I appreciate the performances, but it makes me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's true of a few of these films, you know, where, I think that this is why I think television has been so critical, not just Pose, but like How to Get Away with Murder, you know, that you know, he's out, he's paused, he's talking about PrEP, he has a boyfriend, they make love, looking, you know, same, these, you know, these shows, especially the ones that are mainstream, that are in everybody's home and people watch them, they're diverse. It's not the only storyline, but that is a storyline, and that person still has love, and he still has sex, and he still has kids, and he still, you know, all these things that we know people living with HIV can still do. So it really, in this era, I think there's really room for a film, you know, I think there's room in more films to cover, you know, people living with HIV as just that, you know, as just, they're one of the characters living with HIV. And then whatever the other drama and stuff is, it's not really about the HIV anymore.
I mean, I'm telling you, Diane, we can whip up plenty of drama. I'm good with the drama. It's around me. It's not just my HIV. The HIV is the least traumatic thing in my life sometimes.
I know. I mean, that's 100% exactly what needs to be done, because it's just like, you know, I think that could be a really, you know, it could be a really interesting modern film if we just started being, people living with HIV just started being included as characters in the same way you would include somebody, you know, who has diabetes or, you know, uses a wheelchair.
And I think that, and what I do, I think that opens the door to people, performers, actors out there who are living with HIV, because, you know, I can count on one hand how many people in this country that we know are living with HIV who are in front of the camera and as a performer. And you can't tell me that there's only 5 of us out there. So, you know, when storylines and films and television projects start normalizing it and talking about it, I think that then opens the closet door, so to speak, for those to feel more confident to step out and talk about it. And then, you know, as I always say, it's a conversation. The more we talk about it, the more we normalize it.
Exactly. I wanted to briefly mention 3 TV projects that there was And the Band Played On, 1993. There was Angels in America, 2003. It was a miniseries. And then there was HBO again, The Normal Heart, in 2014. Do you all have any thoughts on those 3?
I'm going to let Shaun talk.
Yeah, I feel Diane and I have spoken too much.
Yeah, you better talk.
Like, The Normal Heart was something that was very, very, very important to me at a younger age. And it was beautiful to see, like, the love story between the main characters, and sort of what that love story could withstand and what it couldn't. It's something that I always sort of refer back to whenever it's like you think about relationships and you think about marriages, and it's till death do us part, and that was literally till death do them part. So yeah, I always treasure that movie.
I haven't watched any of those 3 in a while, but I remember at the time I thought they were very potent. But I would like to watch them again just to see how well they hold up. But obviously they were all three of those were pretty prominent at the time in terms of dealing with topics pretty openly, being on HBO where you could explore things deeper, and having, you know, A-list cast members who could attract viewers and get them to watch them. Another film I wanted to mention.
Oh, what else is in the City? Oh, that's television as well. I keep thinking of TV. Terrible.
Well, you know, but
there's
TV really has, if you look at the landscape of what is, of the caliber of talent, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera, that are telling these stories. You know, this visibility is getting out there, whether it's HIV related, whether it's trans related, whether it's, you know, gender norms or gender identification. I think, you know, television really has kind of overtaken film in leading the way, and also showing that these films can be made. Okay, Bros had a disappointing box office, but look at Fire Island on Hulu and other things like that. You know, I mean, the idea that it's a niche audience anymore, whether it's HIV or LGBTQIA+ or whatever, I think is thankfully eroding, and that's a good thing.
I think TV, and I was going to mention this as we were closing, but I'll mention it now. I think TV has been so much more daring and been able to tackle so much more. And as you said, there's just so much more diversity on television. And you know, some of these great films that we've talked about have been important, still hold up, but TV has really been more of a frontier in terms of diversity and really taking these issues. I remember the episode, Diane, of How to Get Away with Murder, where they were discussing, you know, PrEP and having sex. I'm like, man, I would never have seen 2 or 3 years ago. It's like, kudos to you for really doing this. And primetime television. This wasn't.
I remember. I remember talking with Conrad right at the time, that the actor who, you know, who plays the character, and I just, you know, remember, you know, saying that they're really going, and he had complete support behind the scenes for all of this, and they had people, you know, who really knew what they were talking about. And I think the thing with TV, what's also evolved for us is that we've gone from HIV when it would appear, so HIV or AIDS in the early days, when it would appear, it would be an episode, a very special episode, you know, so you'd see it on, you'd be happy. Designing Women did a great episode. Would it
Golden Girls?
Yeah, exactly. So you would have it and then it would be gone. It would be a random character. And what's happened now is we have, you know, well, Pose, you could not have centered it anymore, basically. So we've moved into the point where we're not like, you know, people living with HIV are not just, you know, one episode, special episodes, and then they go away. Now they're main characters and they're having full fleshed out lives, and you know, and taking their meds is really not the big part of it, you know? So I think that's what's done. You know, we missed another documentary, 5B. I thought that was
5B was extraordinary.
Yeah, I think that one's really, I remember, you know, we remember visiting friends at SF General in the AIDS ward, and those women just you know, we're doing amazing there. And so I think that's a really good documentary for anybody to watch, but especially.
Can I just give a shout out to, we're talking about a lot of English language film, but, you know, Pedro Almodovar and All About My Mother is another fantastic piece of cinema that really, you know, talks to it as well. And I think beautifully done.
Exactly.
Oh, BPM. Then, if we're going to say foreign, BPM.
Yeah, I was going to move on to two films I think are extraordinarily underrated. One of which is BPM, Beats Per Minute from 2017. Oh, I love that film, and I was
excellent.
So mad when it wasn't even shortlisted for the Academy Award that year. I'm like, what the hell? But have you all seen BPM?
I haven't seen BPM. I know about it. I haven't seen it, so I can't speak to it.
It's incredible. I think it's a must see as well. I think you'll enjoy it, Karl. You know, I think that it gets less attention here, of course, because foreign language films always do with mainstream American audiences, but it's riveting, and it's you know, it's very much like along with you know, How to Survive a Plague, in terms of how, you know, how moving it is.
It really puts you in the heads of these characters too, what they're dealing with as they're dealing with, you know, I think it's an extraordinary film. All right, one of my favorite films came out in 2017, and I think it was kind of a groundbreaker because, as we've mentioned, most of the films that we've seen dealing with HIV and AIDS, especially in the 80s and 90s, were dire. They were well made, but the main character had to die simply because that was reality. 2017, we had a film called Paris 559, Theo and Hugo. I'm not sure who all's seen that, but I think it's just, oh my God, Carl, I cannot, oh my God, Carl.
Okay, Carl, very sexy film.
I've got a lot to do. I've got a lot to watch.
Oh my God. Diane,
Carl,
help me out. Have you seen it?
I have, yeah. You should see it. It's a very sexy
John, have you seen it?
I have not, no.
See, I don't feel, thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna let Diane talk about this too, but I'm gonna get dibs first of all. Okay, Paris 559, Theo and Hugo is about this young couple who meet in a sex club, and it really, the first 15 minutes is just graphic because it really puts you in their shoes. I mean, they go in there, it's all about attraction, everybody's having sex, they get caught up in the moment, they have sex, unprotected sex, and one of the characters, there's an exposure issue. And it's really about moving on, saying like, okay, what do we do next? How do we deal with this right now? How do we deal with moving on our relationship? And it's such an optimistic film. It's such a, I remember the film got, a reputation for its first 15 minutes, which were graphic as hell, very erotic, but it's such a love letter. It's such a sweet movie, and everybody I know has loved it.
Well, you mentioned that, and just I don't know whether you guys saw 3 Months, which actually came out earlier this year over the summer with pop singer Troye Sivan, and it's a great little film.
No, I did not.
It's a wonderful. This one I have seen,
okay.
But it's a great film, and it's about a teenager and his first-time boyfriend, sort of figuring life out, and there's a potential exposure, and he's got to wait the 3 months.
Yeah.
To find out whether he's HIV positive. And it's just a great little film. I believe it's available on Amazon, but it's got Troye Sivan in it. And I think you can also see it on Paramount Plus as I look at the sheet. But that's a really great film. But just,
I thought it was really great, but I did, it's one of those ones that's still rooted a little bit in, I had a lot of conversations with people about why he had to wait 3 months to get,
Well, because it's not set in current day. We should point that out. It's based on the director. It's something that happened to the director personally.
Yeah.
But back when these things took a lot longer than they do now.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a historical thing, but it's very lovely. Troy is very lovely in it, and it's sweet.
What I want to go back to Paris 559 briefly.
Sorry.
No. I can talk about this movie for. What I love about this movie because it cannot have been made in the 80s or 90s, and it's really about, as Diane said, moving on, realizing that this is just something that you're dealing with. It's not a life sentence. You can survive this relationship. Let's just move on. And I just thought that message, and for me, that was a turning point because that was when I think about movies that I love, like Longtime Companion and It's My Party. Those are films that are so potent, that can punch you in the gut. But I mean, you look at the current day, the situation, and a film like Paris 559 it's just so much more current. It's really about how we can, what's available now, how we can move on and just treat this, like it's just any other thing they're dealing with. Are there any other films that we have forgotten about or really didn't discuss? Some films that maybe have fallen through the cracks?
I feel like I've mentioned all the ones that stick out to me. Shaun, you've been too quiet. Shaun's got a list.
Come on.
I was just going to circle back around to the TV show talk because, again, growing up in rural South Carolina, the TV was sort of my window to the world. So whenever you had, Pedro Zamora on MTV's Real World and you saw what he was going through and the first same-sex commitment ceremony and, Gloria Rubin's character in ER, who was living with HIV and trying to build a family and had the professional crisis of conscience. It was really something to have those people like in your house all the time. People didn't even talk about, we weren't educated on straight sex education, much less queer sex education in South Carolina. So having that, I believe, was essential for, queer use in my area. and how we grew up with, you know, knowing Pedro's story, and we carry that with us.
It was just
today. Yeah.
100% groundbreaking. Yeah. I think that that's, you know, it gets lost in the weeds because that was the very beginning, other than American Life, that was really the beginning of reality TV. But this is the thing, is TV touches people in a way because it comes into their homes, like you're talking about. And we feel like we have intimate relationships with these people because we see them every week. And so this allowed, especially young people who are my age and younger, to really, you know, build a relationship with somebody who is living with HIV, but also see that he was very sweet and he was cute, and, you know, he had a cute boyfriend, and Shaun, his relationship with Shaun, and the, you know, the whole thing, you know, just was really, you know, I think important, but it wasn't bogged down as well. You know, it wasn't, every week wasn't a gut punch. Pedro dying was a gut punch, but every week wasn't a gut punch. Very often there were a lot of other crap going on, you know. And so I think, you know, that's what Pedro gave us. It was very, very important. There's also that movie 1 Week. Did anybody see that film?
What's the name of it?
It's called 1 Week. It was that's actually with I'm trying to remember it. Kenny Young is starred in it, and it's basically like he's about to get married, but thinks he may have HIV, and he has to wait a week for the test results. I didn't have an opportunity to see it, and I'm terrible with seeing stuff if I've missed the screeners, so I want to go back and see it. But I do recall that was one, you know, that did feature Black folks, is, you know, centered on Black folks as well. And I'm trying to remember, I just feel like there's other, there's definitely some other documentaries, you know, that are probably laudable. Even there's a new one the Black AIDS Institute just put out with that one with it's HIV/AIDS and Black Americans, or Black Americans and HIV AIDS, something like that. I think it's really important for us to be cognizant that when we say things have changed, because they have, because you can get PrEP, because if you have exposure, you just have to go to the hospital and get PEP, your post-exposure treatment, you know, there's no reason for you to fear HIV at this point. But we also know that there is a huge issue of untreated HIV in, you know, Southeast America.
That's the South, yes.
In the South. You know, that we do know that rates are still rising. Rates have stabilized for Black women, but for Black men, you know, rates are still rising there. And that in Africa itself, the problem is so far from over. They don't have access to the resources we do. And, you know, so I think it's important for us to talk about what's real, you know, here we want to destigmatize this stuff, but let's also not, let's not like gloss over the realities for, you know, people of color. I'm an Indigenous woman, and Native American women have some of the highest rates of untreated or undiagnosed HIV in certain areas, certain cities. So, you know, I think that, you know, for every community, their stories aren't told. We know white folks' stories are always told first, and then it filters down and stuff. So my hope is that, you know, that the medication, that the treatment, the prevention, the post-exposure treatment, all of that is, and the stigma reduction, all of that is also going to filter down to communities of color in particular.
Exactly. I was trying to remember, did Noah's Ark have a character with HIV?
I'm trying to remember if it did.
For some reason, I can't, I mean,
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think there was a scare early on.
Okay.
It's like one of their storylines, but I don't think that they actually did.
Okay. I've got
with Daryl Stevens. There was something with.
I think Wilson Cruz was on there, and he played a character.
I think I froze.
HIV positive.
Okay. I have one more question for our panelists. I just want to ask you, in the next 5 years, would you want to see film that deal with HIV and AIDS, where do you want to see them grow or move to? We'll start with Diane.
Oh gosh, you're starting with me. Well, I think I probably match Karl. You know, ideas in that I'd like to see films that are normalized.
Yeah, you're back.
Did I freeze?
You're back.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'd like to see films that are normalizing living with HIV, because you know, many people are. It is a chronic condition, just like diabetes, and it's treatable. Your life is normal. You have the same life expectancy. So I'd like to see those characters be something other than just the man with HIV, woman with HIV. So if that person is a drug addict, who, like in the Queen Latifah film, a drug addict who's, you know, had HIV for 10 years and is trying to get custody of her child back, you know, that's a good story. You know, somebody who's falling in love and is torn between two lovers, and, you know, he happens to have HIV. That's a good story. Let people living with HIV be full characters, fully faceted characters, and let's have them rooted in the real numbers, the real science behind all of this, not the stigma that we've lived with for so many years.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Diane said, and let us, those of us living with HIV, be the ones that are telling those stories and are part of that storytelling, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera and on the producing side of things and on the marketing side of things. Ask us, you know, use us as resources. Come to us. We're living it firsthand. I have the conversation at ABC all the time when, you know, we're talking about World AIDS Day, or we're talking about AIDS Walk or promos, and I'm like, well, does someone want to come and talk to me about it? You know, I'm living with it. So it just goes to what Diane was saying, you know, but utilize this in ways that is positive and reinforces what it means in this day and age to live with HIV.
And also, can we start saying HIV and AIDS, or HIV or AIDS? HIV/AIDS is not what it is anymore, you know, right. And that old, even using that old, I know a lot of organizations, our magazines all moved away from that long ago, but people still do it, and you still see it in films and film categories. Mm-hmm. And it's dated. It's very dated. So it should go away as well.
Shaun, any final thoughts on what you want to see in films dealing with HIV and AIDS in the next
you know, following up on everybody else, I just want to see it normalized. I don't want it to be used as shock value. Whenever we were talking about kids earlier, that's what the first thing that comes to mind whenever I think of that movie is shock value. It just needs to be like a part of who the character is. It doesn't need to be just like whenever somebody comes out as queer or if they're trans. It's just a part of who they are. It's not their defining characteristic, is what I would like to see. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. Karl, Shaun, Diane, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for this great conversation. I really enjoyed myself. Thanks so much, and I hope we can do more panels like this in the future. And Karl, Paris 559. Watch it tonight.
Listen, well,
Karl's got to take a weekend off to watch all these movies now.
Just finish this. I'm ready to get off Zoom and get in the car so I can go home. I'm watching it the minute I get home.
Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you all soon.
All right.
Thanks,
everybody. Thanks you all. Thanks again.